program started? How long do you want to talk to? Sure, yes, start.
Mic to Mr. Brother Imam Khalid Latif. Maybe he'll give a little bit of introduction about
to me. And he, when he understands the statement that he has made, is now quite worried. He goes to sheikh after sheikh and scholar after scholar and asks them about this situation. That I set forth this conditional statement that if the beauty of the moon is not greater than the beauty of my wife, or rather if my wife's beauty is not greater than the beauty of the moon, then I'm divorced from her. Are we divorced? And each one of them says yes. And then he comes and he asks Imam Shafi rahimahullah this question, and Imam Shafi says to him, no, you are not. And many of the others, they say, why are you just telling him what he wants to hear? You know what the Sharia says. You understand the statement that he set forth. He is divorced from his wife. He says, no, he is not. Because Allah tells us in Surah At-Teen, لَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي أَحْسَنِ تَقْوِيمٍ, that we have created man in the most beautiful of forms. And that means that we as human beings, our beauty exceeds any of the rest of creation. The sun, the stars, the moon itself, whatever it is. That verse, external manifestation, that's where the real beauty comes in. The word taqweem itself, it comes from the same root in the Arabic language is the word to stand, qama. And the idea of a taqweem is not that it's just a form or a mold that just exists in that sense. But essentially the idea is that it is something that bears manifestation in such a form, just like when you're standing, you're upright, so too the taqweem is a form that is indicating that it is in its most upright of forms. And it gives a denotation of an idea that there are multiple pieces that come together in order to make it that whole form of what it is. And so for us, that form is not just the external, but there is a relationship between the internal and the external. And when they come to a place of synergy that understands the relationship between the two, your engagement of the world around you is heavily tied to the world inside of you. You can affirm a recognition of being in that most beautiful of forms, aspiring towards this thing of ihsaan. The definition that the Prophet ﷺ, you are engaging in your household or secrecy, God's eyes are always on you, so be careful. But the challenge here is that it takes away from us a certain recognition that really allows for empowerment and strength. Where when we look at the Prophet ﷺ and just the simple yaqeen that he has on Allah, the certainty, the certitude, stems from a recognition not of a God that he's afraid of in the sense that it's paralyzing and he doesn't go out and do for society, because undoubtedly the Prophet, with his understanding of Allah, transformed the Meccan society. He's still transforming societies till today. It didn't put him in a place where he was scared and he had to put his reliance solely on the dunya, the acquisition of the material, having a certain amount of wealth, and then at a later time in his life he would go out and do. But with a strong sense of knowing who his God was, and understanding that that God was with him, he was able to go out and engage the world in the way that he did. In a hadith Qudsi, a genre of the tradition, that essentially formulates itself off of a construct that says the Prophet ﷺ has said that Allah has said, and then whatever it is that Allah says. There is a narration in the Hadith Qudsi where the Prophet ﷺ says that Allah has said that I am as my servant thinks I am. Your perspectives of Allah will be tied to your perspectives. Meaning you can pray the way somebody else prays. You can fast the way somebody else fasts. You can dress the way somebody else dresses. You can eat, you can speak, you can do things just the way somebody else does. Your belief is in your heart. You can't just believe because somebody else believes. And you can't just say my belief is what someone else's belief is. Because beyond your tongue, it has to bear concrete place within you. And so if you were to sit down and someone was to ask you, who is your God to you? Not the answer you're supposed to give. Not one that's written in a text authored by somebody else who had an understanding of who Allah was to them. Not a repetition or a parroting or a mimicking of a YouTube video or a khutbah or a dars where you had someone else say and you're just replicating, but it's coming from your tongue and not from your heart. But if someone was to ask you, who is your God? What would you say? For many of us, the understanding that Allah is watching us depicts for us in a process of socialization a God who is an angry old man in the sky looking for a reason to send us to hell. Everything turns into right and wrong and do's and don'ts, and we do more wrong than right, but we also then only see where others do wrong rather than right. We find ourselves in a place where we fail to really move forward because we're just worried that anything and everything that we'll do is incorrect. We don't believe in a God who is actually Rahman, whose mercy and compassion is so strong. The grammatical construct of fa'lan that Rahman takes, the form, indicates that that characteristic is what just embodies you in your entirety at that moment. So if someone was to say that I'm exhausted, I'm just utterly tired, it's just what I am right now, they would say, Ana ta'ban, that I am tired, that's just me. If I'm so hungry that that's all I can think about, that's just what I am in that moment, then I would say that I am Jaw'an. If you don't do anything and I just think you are the laziest of the lazy, and the only thing that I understand you by is your laziness, then I would call you kaslan. But it follows that form of fa'lan. And the Rahman indicates that that's just Allah in His entirety when we call Him by that attribute. Allah is Rahim. His mercy is continuous. It just keeps going and going. He is Latif. He is gentle. He is kind. He is Wadud, the source of an unconditional love, who does not love His creation because they simply come from a certain culture or context or espouse a certain creed. Not because they have a certain race or ethnicity or are part of a certain social class. But Allah's love is perfect, and it understands and embraces diversity and accepts us despite our imperfections, just as any perfect love would. But is that the God that you believe in? Really ask yourself. The Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam, we find his story throughout the Quran. A man who looked to the stars and the moon and the sun and finding deficiency in all of them, knowing that this is not my Lord. And when he gets to a place where he has a recognition that there is a creator of even those magnificent things in creation, he needs nothing else but that God. When he engages in conversation with his community and he asks them, why do you worship what you worship? What do you really get from it? And essentially, their end statement is, we're just doing it because that's what the people before us did. Would our answer really be any different if anyone asked us why we practice our faith? And when he engages them, he says to them that my God is not like this. My God, he feeds me and he gives me drink. My God, he heals me of pain. He believes in a God that is his provider, is his sustainer. A God who has put him in this world and a God who will take him out. A God who before there was anything, there was him. And when there is nothing, there will still be him. A God that he builds a relationship with on values of love, hope, mercy, and compassion. And you ask yourself, who is the God that you worship? Because you can't have ihsaan without having Allah. That's the definition that the Prophet gives. أَن تَعْبُدَ اللَّهَ كَأَنَّكَ تَرَاهُ. You worship Allah as if you can see him. Because you understand, although you cannot see him, he can see you. Pivotal in that is understanding first and foremost, well, who is the entity that you believe is watching you? The Prophet ﷺ on one occasion is with his companions and they see a mother who is frantically looking for her child in the aftermath of a battle. And the Prophet ﷺ, he is the best of teachers. He knows when it's important to teach, he knows how to teach, he knows how to take examples, make analogies, illustrate certain points to his companions so it sticks with them. And so now this mother is looking for her child, and when she finally finds the child, she embraces the child just as any mother would when she is worried about her baby. The Prophet ﷺ turns to his companions and he says, do you believe that this mother would ever hurt her child? They say, of course not, O Messenger of God. Do you believe that she would ever harm him? Do you believe that she would ever throw him into a fire? They say, of course not, Ya Rasulullah. And he says, Allah is more merciful to his creation than this mother is to its child. That on another occasion, the Prophet ﷺ is traveling with his companions. And they come upon some Bedouins and they sit down to have a meal with them. And there is a Bedouin woman who is cooking upon a large pot that is set upon some flames. And her child comes to touch the pot. And before he could touch it, she pushes him away. And she goes to the Prophet ﷺ and says, are you the one who claims to be the messenger of God? He says, yes. The one who claims that God is more merciful than anything that shows mercy? He says, yes. Even more merciful than a mother is to its child? And he says, yes. She says, then know this. A mother would never let her child feel any pain. The Prophet ﷺ responds by lowering his head and crying. My wife, my daughter and I, before my son was born, went to California a couple of Ramadans ago. And I was invited to give some lectures and some masjids there. And one of the evenings that we were there, I'm from New York City, the United States. I was supposed to introduce myself and I forgot, I'm sorry. And so my wife, her name is Priya, my daughter's name is Medina, my name is Khalid. I apologize again for not letting you know my name. And so Medina, Priya, and I, we were in California, and some of my students, I work at New York University. I'm their university chaplain, the director of their Islamic Center. I teach some classes in their School of Public Policy, their School of Individualized Study. So I met with some of my former students who had graduated, some of our community members from our Islamic Center who moved out to California. They took us to watch the sunset over the San Francisco Bay. And so to get a better view of the actual sunset, we walked up this small type of mountain, so to speak. My daughter Medina, she has a lot of life, a lot of vibrancy. Make dua for her. She's one of the greatest blessings in my life. And she's running just as she normally would, laughing, smiling, inculcating a sense of invigoration with everybody else. And we stopped for a moment at a lookout point where there were some telescopes and some rocks that had been set up to be benches where people could get a better view of what was taking place over the bay. So while we're standing there, Medina, who's about 2 years old at this point, a little less than that, is jumping from rock to rock to rock. And as she jumps from one to the next, she suddenly slips and falls, bangs her head on the ground. Up until this point, my daughter has never hurt herself. She's gotten bumps and bruises, and whenever she's cried, one of us has just held her close to help her stop crying. So my wife Priya, she goes to our daughter Medina and she holds her close to her. And as she's holding her close, she starts to turn with her, and as she turns, we see that Medina has a deep gash on her forehead and blood is pouring everywhere. All of us run in every direction to just find some bandages, some water, something to stop the bleeding. My wife, Priya, she's just paralyzed in shock, horrified at seeing our daughter in this pain. And after some time had passed, Medina is laughing and playing again, and everybody else is laughing with her. My wife, Priya, is still just silent. And you could tell that she is in a state where if she had the ability to do anything to keep our daughter from feeling the pain that she felt, she would have done it. Even if she had to be the one who had taken the pain so that my daughter wouldn't have been hurt, she would have 100 times over hurt herself so our daughter would not have felt that pain. And I had to ask myself in that moment, do I believe in a God that is more merciful to me than my wife is to our daughter? Do I believe in a God that loves me, that has a concern for my well-being, more so than my wife does for our Medina? And I landed in a place where I said yes. But it took a lot of time to get there. The socialization from hearing khutbah after khutbah and lecture after lecture that just turns Islam into a legalistic framework of do's and don'ts and rights and wrongs, which in and of itself is not problematic. We have obligations, we have prohibitions, but the rituals are not an ends, they're a means to something. Whose sake do you pray for? Do you know? For whose sake do you fast? Do you know? For whose sake do you give in charity? Do you know? Every deed and every decision that you undertake when you go out into that world, for whose sake are you doing it? When you do it for a God that you believe in, and you not only believe in, but you believe has your best interest in mind. A God that is not simply watching you, but is watching over you. God who can give you a sense of strength and empowerment so that you don't have to put your trust in the acquisition of wealth and material gain. That obligation does not become burdensome, but you feel so empowered that you really actualize and understand that there is nothing greater or worthy of worship except He. The Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam, who we talked about just moments ago, his community does not know what to do with him. They literally build a fire that is so large and is so strong that no one can get close to it because they want to put him into the fire. And because it is so severe, they have to build a catapult to launch him into it from a far distance because nobody can get that close to it. The Prophet Ibrahim, when he is put into that catapult and they launch him through the air, the angel comes to him and presents himself to the Prophet mid-air. I'm here. Do you need anything from me? The Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam, he says, are you my God? And he says, no, I'm not. He says, then I have no use for you. Allah Azza wa Jal does not allow for His believing servant to be harmed in that way. And He commands the flames of that fire to become cool. The Prophet Ibrahim, there's narrations that say that that time that he spent in that fire, it wasn't moments, it was days. And he says that those were some of the best days of his life. But he needs nothing other than Allah. And Allah is there for him. But the crazy thing is that even when we don't recognize Him, Allah is still there for us, giving to us, providing to us, sustaining us, enabling us. Ihsaan is a real important thing for us to reflect upon. But the introspection and contemplation necessitates real reflection. You're not going to think of God only in mere moments and then suddenly have an epiphanatic experience, but you have to break yourself away from the shackles of this dunya and be in a place where you have real reflection. Imam al-Haddad rahimahullah, who from my understanding is very well connected to you all in this community, may Allah preserve him in his lineage. He says in his book of assistance that reflection is the lamp of the heart. That if it departs, then the light within it diminishes. It goes away. If you don't sit and think, you don't reflect, you don't contemplate, you're in a place where the reality of the world just pulls you and pulls you and pulls you. Simple things just become mechanical. The attentiveness, the mindfulness, the real consciousness, the taqwa that comes from the embracement of certain ritual becomes not even secondary or tertiary, it's just not present because the ritual is for the ritual's sake itself, not seen as a vehicle towards something else. How are you going to know who God is if you don't ever think about Him? How are you going to have an understanding or a reflection, a consciousness of your Creator when you're not even able to sit with yourself ever? What would you do if you were in a room on your own? You didn't have one of these to distract you. You weren't in a place where the internet was there was no emails, there was no television, but there was also no people, there was nobody else to communicate with. It was just you and that's it. Would you know how to be with yourself? Would you be able to pass the time in certain ways? I mean, think about it. Our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam would regularly seek solitude just to reflect. If you've ever gone to Madinatul Munawwara or Makkatul Mukarramah, and may Allah make us from amongst those who are blessed to visit the city of His Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and to visit his house, to visit the Kaaba over and over and over. The Prophet would literally climb up a mountain and sit in a cave. And that cave, if you've ever seen the cave of Hira, is not big like this room. You can only fit one person at a time in there. What do you think he did in there? Not for 5 minutes, for an hour, not even for a day. There was times when he would take his provisions and be there for weeks. And sometimes he would run out of provision, and Khadija radiallahu ta'ala anha would bring him even more. Real reflection, real contemplation, real understanding. The process does not have to be self-deprecating. Your introspection will allow for you with confidence to see what Allah has endowed you with actual skills, with actual God-given talent, your real strengths as well as your non-strengths. Our arrogance only lets us see weakness in the world around us. We can point out everyone else's flaw and fallacy. But when it comes to us, we don't want to really admit what it is that we have to offer. The transformative aspect of this faith through Ihsaan is such that once you believe in that God and your desire is not to live a life in pursuit of this dunya in hopes of gaining some portion of it or in fear of losing some part of it. But it's also not just simply in pursuit of Jannah. May Allah make us from amongst those who are entered into His Jannah without any judgment. It is not just an avoidance of His Jahannam. May Allah protect us from it. But your existence is just in pursuit of the creator of this world, the creator of that Jannah, the creator of that Jahannam. Because none of these things can do anything to you without His will and without His reckoning. When you take it and you start to understand and reflect through your relationship with Allah, what is it that you are really moved by? Your understanding of Ihsaan will be such that you start to adopt an attitude that allows for you to be the person who just goes out there and is a catalyst for real benefit and real good. Abu Bakr radiallahu an, on one occasion, he emancipates 2 women during the time of the Prophet, a woman by the name of Zunaira and a woman by the name of Lubayna, both Muslim women who were servants of individuals who were not Muslim, at that time at least. Zunaira was the servant of a man by the name of Abu Jahl. Abu Jahl used to beat her so much and beat her so hard, she actually lost her eyesight as a result of the beating. Can you imagine? Lubayna was the servant of Umar ibn al-Khattab before he became Muslim. Umar used to beat this woman so often that when he would stop, he would say, "Don't think I have sympathy for you. I'm just tired. When I get my strength back, I'm going to start again." Abu Bakr radiallahu an, he uses his wealth to emancipate these women. And when he does so, his father says to him, "If you're going to set free slaves, why don't you set free some young men who will be there for you out of appreciation for your emancipating them? They'll have your back, so to speak." Abu Bakr radiallahu anh, he doesn't say that, "Oh yes, you're right, I should have done that." But he says, "That's not why I did what I did. I didn't do this because I was expecting something in return. I did it simply because it was the right thing to do, because I knew it would be pleasing to God." That's really what it comes down to. We see inequity in society. We see injustice in front of us. We see oppression. We see so much. But the challenge isn't that we just see it because we're seeing it with our eyes, but we're not seeing it with our heart. And we're in a place too where it's not just about those things that are bad, but full opportunity comes for us to do things that are good, but we just let it pass us by. Real basira is something that is away from us. Because what cloaks our vision is just the false realities of this dunya, and we're not thinking of Allah, we're thinking of our nafs, we're thinking of ourselves. We get to a place where our hearts are secondary, where we don't move in a direction where we even think about how we honor the rights, we exert real ihsaan towards God's creation. So we're not taking care of our own hearts, how are we going to take care of anybody else's heart? We're not doing right by ourselves. We take care of our wants at the expense of our real needs. We feed our stomachs and we satiate our stomachs at the expense of a real satisfaction of our souls. We're in a place where we don't know what it is that we're actively seeking out. But so much of our life is in pursuit of acquisition of this world and of things that we're not going to be able to take with us beyond this world. It becomes hard because that's what the world tells us to pursue. But the real contentment comes from not just these fleeting things, but a recognition of reality that starts with you looking inside first and foremost. Why do you love what you love? Do you ever ask yourself, why do you hate what you hate? Do you know? Why do you desire what you desire? In our education, we learn how to be doctors and lawyers and engineers. We learn how to be academics, we learn how to be artists, we learn how to be activists. We gain professional knowledge, which is not a bad thing. But in the process of gaining tools that help us to feed our physical selves, where do we gain in recognition and understanding of how to take care of our spiritual selves, our emotional selves? If you want to see what Ihsaan really means to you, really ask yourself how you engage with all of Allah's creation. Foundational knowledge that is obligatory upon us comes in 4 frames in our religion. You have to know what is obligatory upon you in terms of your fard al-ain, your individual obligations. So you got to know how to pray your prayer. I can't pray Fajr for you, just like you can't pray Fajr for me. A second box of knowledge that you need to know is a fundamental theology. You have to know who Allah is. You have to know certain aspects of just what we understand theology to be. A third box of obligatory knowledge is tied to specific things that go on in your life. So if you are a doctor, you have to know what Islam says about being a doctor. If you are a lawyer, you have to know what Islam says about being a lawyer. You are a father, you are a brother, you are a wife, you are a mother, you are a sister, you are a daughter, you are a teacher, you are a student. The application of what Islam says to you in your given circumstance as you go into it and while you are in it is something that you are obligated to know. And the fourth box of knowledge that falls under obligation is the fundamental knowledge is just how you take care of your heart. A purification of your inside. And to understand where your heart really lies, your starting point can be just in seeing what is your fundamental etiquette with God's creation. Every aspect of it. Not just people who are like you, not just people who have done right by you. You want to know where your heart is as a starting point? How do you treat your family? Realistically. How do you treat your kids? You're a man and you're married to a woman. How do you treat your wife? Do you honor her rights? How do you treat people who are of a different race than you are? They have a different skin color. They might be darker than you. What do you think of them? How do you treat people who come from a different country than you? Their cultural heritage is different than yours. How do you treat people who come from a different religion than you? They don't have the same faith or belief system. How do you treat people who come from a different social class than you? They don't have as much wealth or they have more than you do. But really, the reactions and the responses of the heart are just manifest in our actions and our deeds. And if you want to know where God really is in your actions, see how it is that you interact with God's creation. And if you are in a place where you are treating people poorly, then really ask yourself, who do you think Allah is? Where the Prophet ﷺ, he tells us in the hadith, in Allah katab al-ihsan ala kulli shay'in, that Allah has prescribed, mandated this thing of ihsan on everything. That is something that you have to do. And in other narrations, he gives us indication, realistically, just of what ihsan is, and just how deep it goes in our faith. We have a narration in our tradition that says, "Ihsaan ila jarik takun mu'mina," that give your neighbor their right, treat your neighbor with ihsan, you will be a believer. Jazakallah khair. And a neighbor in our religion is not just the person who lives to your right or the person who lives to your immediate left, but in our religion, a neighbor is understood to be 40 houses to the right, 40 houses to the left, 40 houses behind you, 40 houses in front of you, and nobody says that those have to be houses of Muslims, but just people who live in your locale. They can be just like you or completely different from you. If they are your neighbors, you need to know if they are eating or not. In our religion, we have mandates, we have requirements, etiquettes, even of how we treat animals that we are about to slaughter for the purpose of consumption. The hadith that says, "In Allah katab al-ihsan ala kulli shay'in," it goes on to say that when you slaughter your animals, slaughter them well. In doing the dhibha, the Prophet ﷺ on one occasion sees a companion who's about to slaughter an animal for the purpose of eating it. And this man is sharpening the blade that he's going to take the animal's life with in front of the animal. The Prophet scolds this man, he reprimands him, and he says to him, "Why are you torturing this beast?" Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu on one occasion sees a man who is about to slaughter an animal for the purpose of eating it. Umar starts to beat this man and says, "Why are you not giving this animal its right? If that's the right that animals have over us, that we're going to slaughter to eat, can you imagine the right that people have over us? And how are we in fact honoring the rights of people? How are we in fact interjecting a real consciousness, a mindfulness of Allah into our daily deeds and decisions?" And it all goes back to where we started. Who is the God that you worship? Allah says to us in the Hadith Qudsi, "I am as my servant thinks I am." If you don't think of Allah, it does not mean that you still don't have a perspective or perception of Him. Your subconscious, your unconscious will yield a certain recognition and reality that then bears manifest in terms of the actions and deeds that you undertake. When you convey to others who God is to you, that's a different conversation altogether than you first and foremost conveying to yourself who God is to you yourself. And then with a sense of that recognition, that ability, that know-how, you go out and you live your life in a way where you worship Allah as if you can see Him. Because you understand, although you cannot see Him, He can see you. You just go out there and you try your very best. You do what it is that you have the ability to do. You leave no room for doubt and leave nothing behind. Because at some point or the other, your time in this world is going to end. And that doesn't have to be a morbid thought. But this darkness, this harshness, this hatred, this bigotry, this selfishness, this greed, this anger, this lust, this egocentricity that has permeated us, the tyranny of the nafs that we fight with day in and day out, beyond the individualized oppressions, the systemic and structural racisms that we see, worldwide. You all see what my country is like. Look at the kind of people that we have running for the presidency of my country. May Allah protect us from it. But we have examples like this. We have to think for ourselves, what end of the spectrum do we actually fall on? And at the end of the day, what am I harboring in my inside? In terms of my perspectives of those that are in the society around me and what I really think of them to be. With a sense of strength, with a sense of true ihsaan, you go out and you be the reason that people have hope in this world and never the reason that people dread it. For 23 years, our Prophet, the beloved of Allah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he went out and didn't stop. He spent his days with every understanding and indication that he was truly a messenger of God. And through his example, we would understand that not only God existed, but that God was a merciful God, a just God, a loving God, a God you would have hope in. When people meet you, would they believe that God exists? And not only would they believe that God exists, would they believe that he is a God that is more merciful than a mother is to his child? When you think of the consciousness that's exerted in your actions and your decisions, within it would you exemplify that reckoning, that understanding of Allah? The beautiful thing is if you're already doing it, you could do it that much better. And if you haven't done it yesterday, just do it from today. You start to reevaluate regardless of your age, regardless of your place in life, regardless of what you believe you have already done. It's not about where it is that you start necessarily, but it's how you finish that's arguably more important. And every minute of every hour of every day that you have, you take with it a sense of gratitude and blessing. And you start to be what it is that we need to have transformation in this world. The Prophet came to revolutionize his society. Messengers were not sent to this world because everything was great. Allah sent his messengers down when people were going in different directions. And for us, we are now in a place where we carry the legacy of the best of creation, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. You and I, we are in a place where the consciousness of our God and the carrying forth of a message that he sent for our benefit needs to bear manifest in our actions. That doesn't mean you have to be the person who's leading the dars or the halaqah. That doesn't mean that you have to be the person standing on the minbar giving the khutbah. You don't have to be the person who has memorized the whole Quran or teaches it to people, knows 100,000 hadith and can take them from memory and transcribe them into books or reiterate them over and over in every circle. You just have to embody a sense of the divine in every sense of the word, through all of your actions, through your character, your demeanor, your personality. Because our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he smiled at people when he greeted them. He never turned his back on anyone when they were talking to him. Despite the responsibilities he had as the community leader, the religious teacher, the counselor, the military strategist, the institution builder, everything and anything that he had to do, he still took time to run races with his wife, to joke with his companions. When a little boy's pet bird dies, he takes a moment to sit down and console him. That's our Prophet. That's what he did. And so where you can go out and be a transformative force, believe that you have something to offer, and then go out and share it without condition. Think of others before you think of yourself, because you're thinking of God as best as you can always. You recognize that it's not about what it is that's just feeding yourself, But you think about beyond a simple feeding of your nafs, how it is that you are filling your hearts. And wherever you have the capacity to do, you go out and do it. Our challenge isn't that we are weak. Our challenge isn't that we don't have knowledge. Our challenge isn't that we don't have skills, we don't have credentials, we don't have degrees, we don't have wealth. Our challenge is that we are actually much stronger than we realize. And we are afraid to admit it. Because once we admit it to ourselves, we will have no reason to justify the indifference and passivity that sometimes plagues us. The Prophet would make dua to Allah, Allahumma inni a'udhu bika min al-ajzi wal-kasal. That, oh Allah, I seek your refuge from inability and laziness. But that inability, ajaz, was not that I didn't have the means to actually do something, that I wasn't able to do it, I didn't know how to do it. But the inability that he sought refuge with Allah from was an inability that he said, Ya Allah, I can do something. I know how to do it, but I still don't do it for whatever reason. Keep me from that type of inability. We can't benefit from the blessing that's uniquely you unless you allow for us to take from you what it is that you have to offer. And I could tell you that it tastes that much sweeter when you do it for a God that you believe actually has your best interest in mind. A God that cares about you. A God that is more merciful to you than a mother is to his child. Rabi al-Basri, may Allah be pleased with her, she would say that I will not serve Allah like a laborer in expectation of my wages. That her doing for Allah was not so that she would get something in return, but she did for Allah simply because she did for Allah. A relationship that was based off of positive values. And when the Prophet's wife radiallahu ta'ala anha would ask him, why do you stand into the late hours of the night in prayer? You are forgiven. He is masoom. His blessed feet swelling, the tears dripping from his eyes. Why did he do it? His response to her is not, oh yes, you're right, I forgot. But he says to her, أَفَلَا كُنَا عَبْدًا شَكُورًا? Should I not be a grateful servant? His relationship with God is based off of something positive. It's a God that he really believes in. So start there. Ask yourself, in pursuit of this thing of ihsaan, who is Allah to you? Bring yourself to a place where you talk amongst each other about this conversation. If you're not used to it, it might be awkward for a moment or so. People don't like being put on the spot. They're constantly confined to believing they always have to give the right answer, the correct answer. But sit and talk to those who you know will not judge you in that way, who embody a real understanding of the character of the Prophet ﷺ and will not belittle you because you are just engaging in a way that you know how to engage. And you make your pursuit of Islam about God. And you make your decisions and deeds as best as you can about Allah. And you understand that even when you fall on your face, there's great benefit in that, because you can find the strength to learn how to get back up on your feet. When nobody else is there and everybody just seems to push you down, you have solace in the fact that your Creator is still there watching over you, coming to you closer and closer with every step that you take towards Him. If I can ever be of assistance to any of you in any of what it is that you have going on, please don't hesitate in reaching out. My name is Khalid Latif. I live in New York City, in the United States. We live in a time where physical distance does not become an impediment for us to be together. Technology has advanced to such an extent that you and I can have a conversation in mere seconds, regardless of the fact that we have 10,000 miles between us. This is the only time that we are meant to be together in this world. Then I pray, inshallah ta'ala, Allah Azza wa Jal gathers us all together again in the best of places in the world beyond this one. Please keep me in your dua. You and your community will be in mine. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guide us and protect us. May He bless us with knowledge that benefits us. May He bless us with a tawfiq to understand and implement that knowledge into our daily lives. And may He guide and bless us all. Wallahu ta'ala alim wa billahi tawfiq. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuhu.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Thank you so much for being here. I am sorry, I did not was misinformed about who's being the speaker or the host today. I did a quick checkup on you. So it was on WikiLeaks or Wikipedia, mashallah, alhamdulillah. And Imam Khalid is the first chaplain in the New York University and also in Princeton University, correct me if I'm wrong, right? And one of the youngest imam in the New York Police Department, something like that. Sure. And you've been engaging in a lot of interfaith discourses and works. Alhamdulillah, we are very blessed to have you here. Is there any question that you want to bring? We'll have a Q&A now, okay. Hello?
I'd like to ask you this question. You mentioned early on when you started this conversation, I've always felt that the creation of the universe and the galaxies and that is greater than the creation of man. This troubles me all the time, but you gave the answer from Imam Shafi, should be good enough. How else do you substantiate this point? Substantiate the creation of man is greater than the universe and that.
Bismillah. So the question was, how do we substantiate the point that the creation of humanity is greater than the rest of creation, the creation of the universe? I'm going to be honest with you, I don't know how to answer that question. And I'm not just moving away or trying to evade it. It's not something that I've ever really thought about. It's quite a deep conversation. I wish I was more intelligent enough to be able to answer it for you. I'm not really in a place where I want to sit up here and just give you the facade of intellectualism when it's not something that I feel comfortable doing. I can tell you that we as humanity are distinct from some aspects of creation. We have certain characteristics that make us different, and for us to understand and recognize, even in that verse from Surah At-Teen that says, لَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي أَحْسَنِ تَقْوِيمٍ ثُمَّ رَدَدْنَاهُ أَسْفَلَ سَافِلِينَ, that the idea was we started in a place where we were quite high, but then we're brought to a place where we become quite low. And different interpretations of this verse, you know, are given. Some people say that it's tied to age, that humanity is given a certain vibrancy, and as they go through their time in this world, that they start to lose some of their faculties and their strengths. Some people tie it to morality. They tie it to the relationship between the nafs and the heart, and how much we give into the false realities of this world, and Allah knows best. But the recognition of our reality in comparison to much of the rest of creation is distinguished by our ability to have some aspect of human agency in relationship to Allah's divine will. You and I can make choices, you and I can make decisions, and then we're taken into account for those things. We're in a place where our sense of accountability is such that we will have a reckoning, and may Allah make it easy for us. But there's beauty that's there because you can actually see then people embody characteristics that make you realize how humanity really is quite remarkable. We see examples of individuals who are motivated by selfishness, people who are motivated by greed, people who are motivated by hate, they're motivated by racism. We find ourselves in a place where quite often we're met with others who simply just do what it is that they can do because it's the right thing to do. I work for the New York City Police Department. Since the time that I've started working there, we've enacted policy that allows women to wear hijab in uniform. And we have Muslim women who now wear hijab in a country that is quite at odds with what it understands the role of Islam and Muslims to be in its society. And these women, one of them, just some time ago, to give you an idea of what humanity is capable of, walked by a burning building where there was people inside who literally would die if someone didn't come to help them. And because she knew that anyone who would be able to come from the fire department would take too much time, she ran into the building just in what she was wearing, no protection whatsoever, and started to take person after person out. And when she sat down with me later, I said to her, I'm going to give a khutbah about you. She said, I don't know why people are making such a big deal about this. I didn't do anything that anybody else wouldn't do. And I sat down and I thought to myself, if I walked by a building that was on fire and I was just wearing this, would I run in and risk my life to help somebody else save theirs? Would the majority of us be in a place where our embodiment of selflessness would go to such an extent that we literally would give our entire being so that somebody else would be okay? And then you juxtapose that to parts of humanity that you really wonder, how is it that they function in the way that they function? I mean, the country of Syria, to give you an example, has been on fire for the last 3 years. May Allah make things easy for them and end the tyranny that's there. Much of the world was in a place where they were oblivious. It took a 3-year-old boy drowning in the sea and his infant body washing upon the shore of Turkey for the world to stop and say, what's happening there? And then a month later, everybody forgot. That's humanity also. We're not the strongest of God's creation. We're not the fastest of animals on this earth. We can't fly the way that some animals can. We can't swim to the depths of the ocean and the sea. We're not in a place where we can jump the highest. We're the only animals that even when our stomachs are full, we still feed ourselves. And we keep feeding ourselves. And we don't care who it is that we have to take from. We'll just take it so we can get ours. So the verse indicates to us what it is that we have the potential of being in both directions. And you just have to ask yourself, where on that spectrum do I want to fall? The sun and the moon will do what they're meant to do until Allah keeps them from doing those things. The thunder and the lightning will have a relationship that indicates the remembrance of Allah. The flowers will bloom, the trees will give us fruit. We will be in a place where we can take from this dunya whatever it is that we want to. But we will make our choices. We will make our decisions. And some of those will indicate real beauty, and some of those will indicate real ugliness. And what I'll tell you is one of the most ugly things that we have as humanity today is not people who are oppressive and unjust and racist and bigoted and hateful. Those things are disgusting. May Allah protect us from them. But to me, what's even uglier is the fact that some of us see those things taking place. We have the ability to stop them and do something about it, and we still don't do it. Our indifference is vile. The justifications that we give for it makes no sense. We start to think about it in terms of our hearts. So I couldn't give you a deeply philosophical understanding of where we fit into the broader scheme of the cosmos, and how it is that we can understand more explicitly where it is that we lie in terms of our recognition in comparison to other things that are out there. But I can tell you that some of the things that we believe make us beautiful do not make us beautiful. And some of the things that really make us ugly, we're not even consciousness of the fact that how ugly it's making us. So again, you start from your inside. Because you can't give to people something that you don't have to give. If you have love inside of you, you'll give love to people. If you have peace inside of you, you'll give peace to people. If you have mercy inside of you, you'll give mercy to people. If you have anger, if you have hate, you have confusion, you have greed, these are the things you will give to people. You know what made our Prophet so beautiful, sallallahu alaihi wasallam? He was just always thinking of others. He just continuously and constantly gave of himself, even to the extent, subhanallah, that when we are out of this world and we are standing in front of Allah on the Day of Judgment, where there is such chaos and such frenzy, even there the Prophet will think of others. He says in the hadith that the men and women, they will be standing with no clothes. Some of them will be up to their ankles in their sweat. Some of them will be up to their knees. Some of them will be up to their chins. Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha says, Ya Rasulullah, how will this be? Won't the men and women look at one another? He says, Ya Aisha, ashadu min dhalik, it'll be more severe than that. They will go to the likes of Adam alayhi salam seeking intercession. And Adam alayhi salam will say that Allah is angrier today than He has ever been, and He is more angry today than He will ever be. I have to think for myself, what can I do for you? They'll go to the likes of Ibrahim alayhi salam, Musa alayhi salam. Each person will be saying, nafsi, nafsi, myself, myself. All will be concerned about what it is that they're bringing to the table. There's only one owner of that day. There's only one possessor of that day. There's only one master of that day. That's Allah Azawajal Himself. We won't even have clothes to wear. And amidst all of that, one voice will be saying, Ummati, Ummati, my ummah, my ummah. Still thinking of others when everyone else is thinking of themselves. That is the voice of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. May Allah make us from amongst those that the Prophet intercedes for on that day. But how do you embody that? To be a real ummati of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And I'm not going to say it in a way that it's other than what I'm saying. Because for some of us, it's easy for us to deny Allah. You can't deny the Prophet. The man is just remarkable. When you truly understand who he is and what he's representing, it's easy to understand Allah in a totally different frame. But that's what makes him beautiful. Think about what it is that makes you beautiful. Think about what it is that gives you a sense of real recognition. I talk a lot. So if I'm long-winded, I apologize. If I'm talking too much, feel free to tell me to please be quiet. Yeah, please, Fadl.
An issue within our society here is that there is a disease of the heart, I believe, in terms of the riya, wujub, pride, and what have you, to really acknowledge the other person within the society, be it a Muslim or an American or a European or an Arab or a Christian or whatever. So, and the other problems we have, that we don't have enough empathy within our society. Which boils back to the idea of Ihsaan, which you say that you were highlighting so much about knowing who your God is. And your God is looking at you, and especially Allah, of course. And that is where I think the problem lies within our society at the moment now. And it's one of the big issues that people really do not, maybe I myself also fall into that trap most of the time. And would you say that correctly?
You know, the interesting thing is that as the world gets smaller and our societies become more diverse, we're in a place where we can actually think certain things about certain populations without ever having met people of those populations. Much of our mindset and our psyche is quite heavily bombarded by media apparatus and political machines that, with no one else's interests other than their own self-interest, capitalize on our tendencies to just discriminate against one another. You want to understand for yourself, in terms of the condition of your heart, just how fundamental social identity works. We think a lot in boxes. Those boxes can be anything: profession, religion, gender, politics, employment status, education level, social class, race, ethnicity, culture, country of origin. Individually, I put myself in a place where I recognize what is any potential box that's out there. Once I've done that, I then now identify for myself which boxes am I in. I'm Muslim, I'm American, I'm a father, I'm a son, I'm a brother, I'm a husband, I'm a teacher, I'm an imam, I'm a chaplain, I'm a professor, I'm a student, I'm an employer, I'm an employee. And once I've affirmed for myself my boxes, I then further concrete myself after I say this is what I am by comparing myself to what it is that I am not. Within that now, the potential lies for commonality and familiarity to be based off of the boxes that I share with others, where we have things in common. So I'll relate to you because you're American like me, you're Muslim like me, you're a father like me, whatever. Our tendency, though, is to exaggerate in a couple of frames. We exaggerate, and we attach value now to shared similarity, as well as we put a pejorative understanding to where we're distinct and different. People can capitalize on this. And us versus them mentality puts us in a place where we succumb subconsciously to notions that are permeating our society, that are taking advantage of us being away from each other. You might not realize it, but people want you to not be with people who are different from you because they will continue to gain. It will make them wealthier. It will allow for them to have more in terms of material gain. They will have more clout. They will have more authority. They will have more power. Where fear comes into play, ignorance comes into play. Look at the man who's running for presidency in my country. He gets up there and just says idiotic things all the time. And you're like, how can you say that? But he knows who he's talking to. He's not talking to me. He's not talking to you. He's talking to people who will buy into that rhetoric and will then come and vote for him, and he could care less who gets hurt in the process. Our understandings of diverse societies can no longer come from media apparatus. You have to learn what people are like by actually going and being with them. There's a man by the name of Henry Tajfel, who is a Polish Jew that lived during the time of the Holocaust. Henry Tajfel was not allowed to go to university in Poland because they didn't let people of his community go to school there. So he had to go to school in France. And when many of his friends and family members were being taken away to be exterminated, he got away because he spoke French, and people didn't think he was Jewish. Eventually, though, they caught on. And they took him to a concentration camp also, but he survived. And despite many of his family and his friends not surviving, when he got out, he wrestled with the question of how genocide is actually possible. How do you get to a place where, as humanity, you can actually kill people in that way? And how do you get to a place as humanity that you know something like that is happening and you don't stop it? He developed something called the minority group paradigm, where he does studies and research to answer this question of how people just function in this way. And he brings together random groups of people, and through his analysis and his research and his studies, he finds that we as humanity will discriminate against each other off of the subtlest difference. That even when people only were distinct in terms of their eye color, he said that was reason enough for people to hate one another. If we were to look at it through a metaphysical standpoint, a religious theological frame, this is just shaitan. The act that cast him out of Jannah was racism. He is told to prostrate to Adam like the rest of creation, and he says, I am of fire and he is of dirt. Essentially, where I come from is what makes me better because of where he comes from. It makes him less. And you know what you got to really think about is that Allah is infinitely just. And that means if Iblis goes to him on the day of judgment and says that you put me out of Jannah because of what I did, these people are doing the same thing, why are you going to let them in? What do you think you're going to be able to say? That, oh Allah, in our society, we don't really do these things. That's just the way people are. It would have been hard or difficult. We would have lost something. It's a problem. And how you start to beat it down is that you go and you be with people who are different. The Prophet was exposed to diversity from a very young age. He found himself in a place where, born in Mecca, his father died at a quite young age, we know this. He was taken by Halima Sa'diyah and the Banu Sa'ad. As was customary at that time, when a child was born, they'd send them to live with the Bedouins for some time. When he was about 5, he started to ask his mother where his father was. And so she took him to Medina to see where his grave is. So that means from the time he was born until he was 5 years old, he went from Mecca to the Banu Sa'ad to Medina. He saw different people living in different ways. It was part of his socialization. If you are taking your kids and all they see at their homes, at their dinner tables, are faces that look just like theirs when they're eating, they're not going to think right of other people who are different from them. The Prophet was reared and raised by many different women. His own mother Amina nursed him. There was a woman by the name of Thuwayba who was the emancipated slave of the Prophet's uncle, who, when he heard the birth of his nephew, the news of it, he became so ecstatic, he set this woman free and said, go and nurse the child. Halima Sa'diyah nursed him as well. And then part of what we're talking about today, a woman by the name of Ayman Barakah, who is arguably the only companion of the Prophet of God, who was with him from the time he was born in this world until the time he passes away. She was taken as a servant when she was 16 in the household of Abdullah, the Prophet's father. She was an Abyssinian woman, she was black. So whenever the Prophet's infant eyes opened up, when he was learning about love and nurture and care, literally in his home he had diversity. When he died, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and people wanted to go and remember him, the likes of Umar and Abu Bakr would go to Ayman Barakah to get a better understanding of who the Prophet was. But how do you expose yourself to diversity? How do you find a different courage that lets you break down stereotypes, preconceived ideas, and notions? and to really think about how you can go and be with people rather than waiting for them to come and be with you. Really think about it. Really think about it. Ask yourself tough questions. What do you think about people who are black? Do you love them? Would you let your child marry somebody of a different culture than your own? Would you? If they came home and they said that, I don't want to marry somebody who's just like our background. I want to marry somebody just because they're Muslim. Is that enough for you? And if it's not, whose sunnah do you follow? If it's not, what God do you believe in? Where we find ourselves is not in a place where we're just taken into account for what we do and what we don't do, but also what we had the ability to do and we still didn't do it. If you can justify and validate not extending a hand to those who are in need, that are reaching out to you with their hands because their hands are not the same skin color as yours, they're not attached to bodies that came from the same country as you, that they're not attached to bodies that believe the same faith as you, then you don't know who Muhammad was. You don't know what Islam is about. You don't have any idea who Allah is. And you're definitely not thinking that you're going to stand in front of Him one day. It's really simple, really simple. Just start being in different places. Let yourself understand how you've landed in the place where you are now. Don't be self-deprecating, but challenge yourself to acknowledge your own microaggressions, your own racisms, so that you don't have to deal with them in the world beyond this one. Deal with them now. Diversity is not just we sit all together in this space for a moment and then we don't do anything with it. And Allah in His wisdom has mandated for us at least 5 times in a day where we have to put aside class and race and ethnicity and we just stand together as brothers and sisters. You don't get to only stand next to somebody who looks like you. Your heart has to beat in unison even for a moment. And your uniformity is not attached to the external, I'm so sorry, but it's attached to shared values. It's attached to your internal, your heart. Where I come from in the United States, there's a lot of problems with race, ethnicity, and privilege. And how it functions is not just in the frame of individualized issues on the street, people calling each other names, but it allows for institutionalized policy and mechanisms to be in place that hold down minority populations. I'll give you an understanding of what I mean. I took 20 of my students to have lunch one day at a street cart near our Islamic center. While we were standing, waiting for our food, there was a middle-aged Caucasian woman who was waiting to order, and she started to push her way through the group saying, "Excuse me, excuse me, excuse me. Can't you understand what I'm saying?" When she got to the front of the group, she looked at me face to face, and she said, "Oh, I guess you can't understand what I'm saying. How do they say excuse me where you come from?" I said, "We say excuse me." And she said, "No, the place where your family's from, how do they say excuse me there?" And I said, "We're from New Jersey, which is next to New York, and we say excuse me." She couldn't understand how somebody who looks like this is actually from the same place that she's in. That's not problematic in and of itself. Actually, it's quite problematic. But now when that mindset sits at a table that impacts legislation and policy, where the only thing that you're engaging of a minority population is not they themselves to speak on their behalf, but just your stereotypes of them. You see the kind of things that take place that are quite unjust. I work for the New York City Police Department. I'm a chaplain there. I'm given the rank of an inspector. It's 1 star, it's 1 rank below a 1-star chief. It's fairly high. It's like a lieutenant colonel in the army. In this military-esque institution, I'm given a uniform, I have a badge. And one of the things that we do as police chaplains every year is attend the memorial service that takes place on September 11th at the Ground Zero site. We start out having breakfast with family members who lost loved ones on that day. We then take a bus down to the Ground Zero site. We wait for the ceremony to start and participate. And so on the 9th anniversary of the attacks, the Vice President of the country, Joe Biden, was there. The ceremony was a little bit more closed off because the current memorial structure was still being built. So they had a stage where the ceremony took place from. In front of the stage was an area for VIPs, city officials, family members. Behind us was an area where the media was documenting. And behind them was then an area where the public could come and view. So while we're waiting for the ceremony to start, I'm in a police uniform, my inspector's uniform. I still have my beard, I'm wearing a head covering, a kufi. I'm talking to people, passing the time. 3 men approach me wearing suits. And they say that Secret Service has spotted you from the top of a building. They want us to check your credentials just in case. I said, just in case what? They said, we're sorry that we're doing this to you. I said, then why are you doing it? To understand what they're questioning is not merely my physical presence there, but the entire validity of my emotion tied to that space. I was an undergrad at New York University on September 11th in 2001. I stood with about 12,000 of my classmates watching the towers as the second plane flew into them. I had media from all over the world because as students, we were arguably the closest Muslim group to the site. And everybody wanted to know, what did Islam think and what did Islam say? We faced a lot of backlash, we had a lot of issues. I attended funerals of people who were Muslim who died that day, as well as people of other walks of life who died that day that I knew. So much of the work that I do till this day is informed by the atrocities of that day. And in that moment, those men are questioning the validity of all of it. And the frustrating thing isn't that I'm going through it, but the frustrating thing is that I can't do anything about it. Because if I was to say anything in return, then it would probably make the situation that much more worse. And so where I couldn't speak, and where everybody else was watching and they said nothing, there was a mother standing next to me who lost her son on September 11th. And she said to those men that what you are doing right now is more dishonoring to the memory of our loved ones that we lost on that day than anything else. That here this young man is standing with us in our moment of need, and you're making it seem as if he's doing something wrong just because he's Muslim. And as easily as they took the validation away, she brought it right back. What you want to primarily understand from this conversation is that somebody sitting somewhere came up with a policy that trickled down to those men that said, if you see someone that looks like this, look at them again. I'm wearing a police uniform. And even if I wasn't, that's not okay. That's what we mean when we talk about institutionalized structural racisms. Things that might not impact the majority, but are definitely impacting minority populations. Things that they can't speak out against because they don't have the power to do so. And if you were to ask me if I was to stand there again and go through it all, I definitely would. Because if my standing is going to make things easier for others, if I'm the only person that's like me in a place, but it's going to somehow make recognition be something that's actualized, then I'm going to do it. Because for certain battles to be won, those battles have to take place in the first place. You might be the only voice that is saying something, but your voice might be the most critical. You might be the only person that's standing, but your standing might be the most important. I sit down with people like Pope Francis, the Dalai Lama. I've met with the President of the United States in one-on-one conversation. I'm interviewed by major media all of the time. People like me who have those connections go through this. What do you think is happening to people who don't have my connections? And things in the United States are changing for Muslims. And there's a lot of positivity. So don't get lost in the story, because it's not about Islam in America. It's about minorities being held down. And what you want to parallel it to is in your country or in other countries that you go to, where I don't know anything about what's happening here. I'm not from here, but I've never visited any place in this world where there's not some type of inequity. And if you don't like hearing the fact that a Muslim is being treated like this miles away, then out of appreciation and respect for what it is that I've been through, don't let people here be treated in that way. And we want to understand what a good person is. Someone who embodies a real sense of value and recognition. Don't think of somebody who's wretched like me, but think about that woman who simply did what was right because it was the right thing to do, who understood her power and her privilege in that moment and leveraged it for someone who was underprivileged and underserved. Who in their right mind is going to say to a mother whose son died on September 11th while she's standing at the ground zero site on September 11th, anything? She knew she was the only one who could say something. And she said it just because she knew she could. I don't even know her name, but I'm not going to ever forget her. That's what you got to do. And you know why you have to meet people where they're at? Because there was hundreds of people who saw what happened to me and they said nothing. But she was in a place where she let herself see beyond the boxes. You just got to be real with yourself. We see people in terms of their skin color. We see people in terms of their class. We see people in terms of their race and ethnicity. We see people in terms of their religion in a way that is not good for us, because elevating yourself by denigrating somebody else is just giving shaitan an entry point to let arrogance be something that runs rampant. Why are you better or more entitled? Really think about it. In New York, where I come from, I'm one of the most prominent Muslim leaders. I don't say that to you to say, look at me, but if I represent Islam in the United States, then I can understand why people don't want to become Muslim. We have moved far away from the man that was the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. What our teachers tell us is that those early generations would look for 1,000 reasons to make excuses for thousands of people, even if they were wrong, to believe that they had goodness and belief with them, rather than faulting and being wrong by claiming one person did not have belief when they actually did. That's going to be the downfall of our community. Shaitan's actions were arrogant, they were foolish, and they were racist. Don't let yourself fall into that mess. Don't let yourself be in that place where it's what it's about for you. And simple things. Set milestones for yourself. So going forward, have specific goals. That in a given month, I will go X number of times to spaces that I could fully get away with not being in, but I'm going to go not even just for the benefit of those people, but for my own benefit, so that I can learn and think and expand my horizons. People ask me all the time, who was your greatest teacher? And I say to them, I've been blessed to sit with a lot of amazing people, but the people who have taught me the most is every single person whose life experience has been different from mine, and I've been able to hear their story and broaden my horizons of just how big this world is and how truly small I am within the grander scheme of things within it, because I can now see things through their eyes. I understand that what I have gone through is not what everybody has gone through, and my experiences are not everyone's experiences. And I can take from them in ways that are unlike anything else. The Prophet's companions were the likes of Abu Bakr, Umar, and Uthman. May Allah be pleased with all of them. People who are Arab just like him. People who are of Quraysh. But you also had people who were like Bilal ibn Rabah, a black man who was the muezzin of the Prophet. People who are like Ayman Baraka, who we spoke about already, Salman al-Farsi, Salman the Persian, Suhaib al-Rumi, white skin, blonde hair, blue eyes, Abu Dhar of the Ghaffar tribe. These were people who came from different spaces. Who are your companions? Who are the people that you bring into your company and you allow for yourself to be in their company? And our gatherings can no longer be exclusive in those ways. And this is what we do. And I know I'm talking a lot, but it's important. And if this is the only time we have together, then we're going to talk about it. We justify and validate our gatherings not based off of who it is that we let in, but often who it is that we keep out. The paradigm of gatherings that are divine in contrast to gatherings that are human are basically distinguished based off of this idea of inclusivity and exclusivity. I work at a university. I used to work at Princeton, as was mentioned. Princeton in the United States has a great reputation. Throughout the world, people know it. It's a great school. Princeton isn't Princeton just because it lets people in with a certain grade point average, a certain set of extracurriculars, a certain set of standardized test scores. Princeton is also Princeton beyond who it lets in, based off of who it keeps out. And if Princeton started to let everybody in through its gates and its doors, it wouldn't be Princeton anymore. And that's what our gatherings are like. We can't tolerate letting people in of different races, because what would people say? Why did you invite that person to your wedding? Why did you let that person come to your iftar dinner? Why did you let that person have a meal in our house? You sit in Allah's house, nobody says, why is that poor person there? Why is that homeless person there? Why is that dark-skinned person there? Why is that light-skinned person there? None of it takes away from the majesty of the divine, but it just enhances truly who Allah is to us, that He lets everybody into His home. And we look for reasons to keep people out. So you start to think to yourself, how will you go and be in different spaces? And then beyond that, how will you start bringing people into your spaces? How will your home be a home that you just start letting in those who are different from you? In the frame of real relationships, not just the facade of it. Eat a meal with somebody who's different from you. Celebrate with somebody who's different from you. When I got married, my wife, make dua for her, she puts up with a lot of my nonsense. I said to her, I want to have a wedding that's open to whoever wants to come. And she said, that's fine, we'll have a smaller reception. She wanted to have like 50, 60 people at a reception, a small wedding. Our ceremony ended up having more than 2,000 people who came. And our wedding reception had 700 people who came. Very different from what she wanted, but she put up with it because she knew it was something I liked. And when you walked into our nikah, there was people who were of every race, every ethnicity, people who were Muslim, people who were not. But you just felt the love in the room. You couldn't deny it. It just felt good to be there. And at the end of it, this elderly African-American woman came up to me. 70 years old, 80 years old. And she said, I had such a good time here today. And I want to thank you for letting me be a part of your wedding. And as we're talking and we're going back and forth, a 70-year-old Muslim woman says to me, this is the first wedding I've ever been invited to in my life. And I want you to know that I'm grateful for that. And I said to myself, that you're thanking me? I should be thanking you. That I uniquely get to benefit from having someone like you be present at my wedding ceremony. I didn't feel bad for her. I felt bad for every fool who could only see her by the color of her skin. And this is hadith. The Prophet ﷺ, he says that the worst of walimas, the worst of wedding receptions, are those who should have been invited were not, and those who should not have been invited were. What are your gatherings based off of? Really think about it. I say it to your brother who loves you, man. We chase after things that really just cloak our hearts from really seeing what the world is about. You gotta fight shaitan. You gotta fight your nafs. Little things that you might not think are such a big deal actually can have big impact. And your voice is more important than you might realize. So I know the night is getting late, and I appreciate you indulging me. Again, if I can be helpful to you in any way, feel free to reach out. As I said before, and I'll say it again, this is the only time that I'm blessed to be in your presence. That Allah allows for somebody like me to be able to be with people like you. And I pray, inshallah ta'ala, Allah gathers us all together again in the best of places in the world beyond this one. Please keep me in your dua. You and your loved ones will be in mine. I pray, inshallah, Allah blesses you and your community immensely, increases you only in that which is good, and gives to you and your loved ones only the best in this world and the best in the next. Wallahu ta'ala alam wa billahi tawfiq. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuhu.
Jazakumullah khair, ya brother Khalid Latif. It's really a wonderful narratives and tapestry of your life and the work that you do. It's really a heartwarming talk, and we can really feel it's coming from the heart, don't we? It's from the heart to heart. That's what it's all about. It is not through some intellectual jargon and whatever. It's just heart to heart, simple facts. Thank you very much. And on behalf of Haq Community Center, we thank you again. And we will look forward to your next visit, inshallah. You are most welcome to come over here. And we'll be communicating to you through Facebook, social medias, and to cross boundaries and cross faith, and really open to spaces where we have not been before. Inshallah khair. And we'll